Our next presenter for today is the lovely Dr. Jeanine Davis. She has over 30 years of experience in organic agriculture, research on different culinary medicinal herbs, non-timber forest products, hemp, hops, truffles, and other specialty crops. So she brings a really diverse knowledge base to us today. Her work aims to improve both the sustainability and profitability of farms by optimizing their production systems and introducing new crops. Dr. Davis is the lead author of the book Growing and Marketing Ginseng, Goldenseal, and Other Woodland Medicinals, which is one of the most comprehensive books on growing forest medicinals, and I lovingly call it the Forest Farming Bible. Dr. Davis will share her wealth of knowledge on different non-timber forest product production and market opportunities. So join me in welcoming Jeanine up to the podium.
I think it's a real joy to be here in person this year. I wasn't able to be live with you last year, so thank you for the invitation once again. Great, thanks. So I'm going to focus on the native botanicals, but as you've heard from some of the talks already, there are many other opportunities with fruits and nuts and vegetables. Forest vegetables is a big one within our area. And where I'm located in Western North Carolina, a lot of our focus is on the small farms in the mountains. So many of our farms are small just because of the topography. So I think it's very well suited for the training we're doing here today. I do want to mention that I give this talk a lot. And so I have been borrowing a lot of slides lately from my friends, a lot of them over Facebook. And if you haven't found that, I have found it very interesting that the forest farming and wild harvesting community has really embraced social media. And they love sharing. So it's like, it's like fishermen talking about their fish. They do the same thing with the size of their ginseng roots and stuff. But it's been a great way to make connections. And then getting the opportunity to visit with these people in person has been a lot of fun, very informative. So I got engaged with forest farming. We didn't use that term at the time, but growing these native botanicals well over 30 years ago because I was asked to by the U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and other conservation groups because our area is very big on wild harvesting. That is an industry. Many of our mountain folks, they rely on a good portion of their income to come from herbs that they wild harvest. It's a well-established industry. And we were over harvesting these plants. And especially as more and more people bought up land, they were becoming more concentrated. They didn't have access to as much land. So there was more pressure. And then our botanists were noticing changes in where our plants were living based on what they were seeing with temperature changes within our environment. And these all were threats to our native populations. So I was first asked to work on Goldenseal, and then again later on ramps, and particularly coming from the Forest Service, what they were seeing happen to our ramps populations because of their popularity. So that began our research and our extension outreach programs on these herbs. And I do believe that all of these can be cultivated. Some of them take a little bit of better understanding because of propagation. I think we have mycorrhizal associations with some of these plants that we don't fully understand yet. But I do believe that we can cultivate all these plants, reduce pressure on wild populations, create an income stream for forest landowners. And many of the new forest landowners in our region have either inherited land or they've come and bought land in our beautiful mountains, and they're not like the traditional forest landowners. So growing for the timber cuts is not foremost in their mind. Matter of fact, we have to do a lot of education because they're appalled that you would cut their trees. They don't understand how to keep a forest healthy. So that's got to be part of our education also, that these two can work together. And then we've got to work with the consumers and the industry buying these herbs and get them to understand the value of cultivated versus wild harvesting. And just, it's an education thing. It's going to take time. We are finding that the market is strongly supporting these efforts, and there's a couple of companies that really come to the top: Mountain Rose Herbs, Herb Farm. Those are several that really, really want to buy forest farm materials. They would like to see a certification. They want to see certified organic, certified forest grown. They've got a portion of their customer base that will pay the premium it needs to support this. So they're helping us get this started, but we've got to extend that. Our consumers are becoming more aware of the conservation status. United Plant Savers started working with Goldenseal at the same time I did, and their efforts to teach the consumers had the consumers asking, where did this come from? And just being called sustainably harvested no longer cut it. So we can work on that end. Um, what the market is finding, and I'm now dealing with some companies over in Europe with black cohosh, is that they see a much more consistent product and quality when it's coming from cultivated material rather than wild harvested material that just comes from all over. So they're ready to invest in the forest farms. And then I've already mentioned our buyers that are seeking some kind of certification on their material. So I'm going to cover some of the native plants. There are literally well over 100. If you can ever get your hands on a list of what buyers are purchasing, um, it's really tiny print and usually 2 or 3 columns on a sheet, and those prices change very frequently. So I'm just going to cover a couple of the big ones, but please know that there's many, many more. The ones I'm going to cover are all native, or I might have a naturalized species in here. They're all perennials. This is long term. And this is the part we're still trying to understand when we bring these herbs into cultivation. How long does it take to go from when you plant either a seed or a propagule to when you can get an economically feasible harvest? And this is something we've got to teach people how to study on their own farms, because we've had people harvest. They're like, oh, yeah, bloodroot, 5 years, I harvest it. And they get it harvested and they weigh it out. And it's like, oh, should have waited. So, how we get those numbers for them? Unfortunately, the primary plant part of interest for all of these are right now are the roots. But more and more, we're seeing the industry turning to the leaves. So then it's not a destructive harvest. So when they're doing extractions, Mayapple is a great example. There was work done in Mississippi that showed that they could harvest all the foliage. They could do the extraction for the chemicals that they needed for the cancer drugs that they were making. They didn't have to harvest the roots. We now have a strong market for ginseng leaves and goldenseal leaves. And that can also carry you through on the years that you're waiting to get to the root harvest stage. So this one's kind of my baby. This is Goldenseal. Um, at the time that I started working on Goldenseal, it was a state endangered species. It came off that list and it's recently gone back on. So we were doing a pretty good job and then something went wrong at some point and they saw populations decreasing once again. Fortunately, Goldenseal is a pretty easy plant to grow. And so I encourage people to plant it. It's a lovely plant to have, and just encourage as much as we can to get people to do this. It's a good one to learn how to grow. It propagates very readily. I mean, it spreads. So you'll have fibrous roots. I've had trying to do research on these in beds can be challenging because it'll send out a fiber root that goes like 12 feet away and pops up in the next treatment plot. So it spreads readily. It's a delightful one to grow. Most people do it from rhizome cuttings. We have been very successful with seeds. There's been a project in Wisconsin with seed production also. But just know, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in another batch. I think you're going to cover this on propagation. These seeds, a lot of them need very special handling because unlike your garden seeds you buy that have gone through hundreds of years of cultivation and breeding improvements, we're still working with wild planting material here. Goldenseal, and I am not an herbalist in the sense of telling you how to use these herbs, but I do like to mention some of the things that it's used for. And Goldenseal is known to boost the immune system. It's anti-inflammatory. It has a huge number of uses within my region in the mountains. It's the go-to for an eye wash, for ear infections, for treating stomach disorders. And for a long time, it was thought to mask drugs in urine tests. And the late Stephen Foster, the herbalist, said that wasn't true. But now it's like, yeah, it kind of is. But the companies that do the testing have learned how to get around that. Bloodroot is another lovely plant, and this is a plant, one that I use as an example of the multiple uses of this plant. So bloodroot is harvested for the root as medicine, which is very strong medicine. Right now, if you go and do a Google search on it, you're going to find videos and such on black salve, which is used to treat skin cancers. Unfortunately, there have been some young people who think, well, if a little bloodroot's good, more will be better, and have actually seriously damaged their skin. The most unusual use I've had and demand for it is there is now a grower in Maryland who produces bloodroot for a company that makes a dewormer for reindeer in Alaska. Talk about a specialized market. It used to be used in Viadent toothpaste for tooth decay, but there was some association that it might be associated with an oral cancer coming as the use, so they don't use it that for anymore. I did some research on it years ago because there was a company in Germany that used it as a natural source of sanguinarine to be used in a dewormer for livestock, but they were not willing to pay the prices that our growers needed to receive for it at that time, and they switched to another plant. So right now we're involved in a project with the Cherokee on the koala boundary with their artisans. This is the second time we've done this project with them, and it's to grow bloodroot as a dye plant. So we're working with their artisans, we're working with the schools and the villages and teaching people how to grow their own so they don't have to go out and search for this in the wild. So, and it's also a beautiful plant. This is one of the few plants of these plants that has breeding work done that you can now get double flowered bloodroot. And where we are in the mountains, we have all these very upscale gated communities where people have to have a certain percentage of native plants. So it's very common for them to hire landscapers to come in and put in like a medicinal herb garden using native plants and such, which is another income opportunity. Black cohosh is a plant that is in continuously high demand, but has notoriously low prices. I'm encouraged by this company in Europe that has now seen so much variability within the wild plants and is now making a special effort to write contracts with some of our forest farmers and also to work with researchers on how do we get the product that has exactly the chemical profile thereafter. So, because right now black cohosh has hovered around $4.50, maybe up to $6 a pound for a very, very long time, but those are wild harvest prices. So, how do we get those prices up? Again, a very easy plant to grow, also has a lot of landscape uses. It's often called a woman's herb. It's a hormone replacement therapy alternative, but now it's being looked at for some other disorders. Ginseng, this is the one that the vast majority of the inquiries that come into those of us working with these plants is on ginseng. Everyone wants ginseng. They want to grow it. It is very popular. It is not endangered. This is one of the few plants that has a lot of rules all the way from the international level with CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, down to federal, the US Fish and Wildlife Service, down to the state level. So you have to have a ginseng protection program in your state that's approved by US Fish and Wildlife in order for ginseng to allow to be exported out across your state lines. So, this one is monitored. So when people buy the ginseng, when people harvest it and take it to their buyers who have to be licensed with the state, They keep track of the number of roots, they keep track of the weight, so they can monitor what's happening with the wild populations. Um, Strong Asian market for it, many, many uses. We joke that my predecessor in my position, Dr. Tom Kuntler, who's 99 years old, by the way, takes ginseng frequently, also had, said 8, 10 children. So the talks about fertility and such is a big joke. And when I took the job, they were like, you better be careful, Jeanine. Solomon seal is one that's only been on my list now for a couple of years. Solomon seal is all over the place. It's always been something that's been traded on, but not in a very large way. And the prices were always very low. But when they really started cracking down on opioids and giving prescriptions to people with chronic pain, anything that could treat pain became popular. And Solomon seal is one of those. So now this is one that we don't have a lot of research on yet. We're all scrambling to figure out how should we grow this, what's going to give us the best returns. But fortunately, so far, we're finding that it's pretty easy to grow. And it's not, there are the small Solomon seal, the large Solomon seal, and there is even some market for the false. So this is one we're still learning about. Blue cohosh is an example of one of the herbs that doesn't have a lot of demand. You might sell your blue cohosh this year and not have anyone wanting to buy it again for another 4 years. So this is one that you might not ever be able to justify buying planting stock and putting in a large bed. But if you have some on your property, you might want to manage that little wild population. And we'll talk about doing that. So it's another woman's herb. It's often referred to, used in childbirth, but I think it's also a beautiful landscape plant. Spikenard is one that we have worked with on and off for many years. It again is one in demand. We went through some nurseries in Tennessee on the drive over here, and we found spikenard plants and mayapple actually, single little plants, not particularly big or healthy looking, in quart pots for $24.99 a piece. So again, thinking about that retail industry could be part of your whole forest farm plan. It's a beautiful looking plant. It's got these beautiful berries on it, and it is traditionally known as the backache plant. So again, treating pain. So let's quickly go into what it takes to grow these woodland botanicals. I am giving this to you from a horticulturist point of view, and I expect in the next couple years, with the changes that has happened in my program with personnel and with our forestry department at NC State, that some of this is going to be modified in the coming years. So when we talk forest botanicals, there's really 4 major production areas. We used to talk about 3, now we say 4. The one is the artificial shade grown. And this is what the vast majority of the ginseng that is grown and exported from North America, both in the United States and Canada, is grown under these artificial shade structures. It is expensive to do, but it is highly, highly productive. So you can pull off a crop of ginseng in 3 to 4 years. You can get yields of 2,000 dried pounds to the acre, and it satisfies a very specific market. And it is totally, it's like a whole different plant or crop than what we're going to talk about in the woods, because they produce what's called slick roots, but it's really good for certain products that are being manufactured. And in the Asian markets, they value a certain shape of a product that has been of a root that comes out of Wisconsin in particular. And it's real easy. If you look at Wisconsin ginseng, you're going to be able to find all kinds of information on that. We're not going to talk about this. We've done some of this, but I want you to know that this industry is there, because you can do black cohosh and everything else under that. This is what's known as woods cultivated or woods grown. And so you're growing similar to what you would do under artificial shade as a horticultural crop. You usually build raised beds, you do your soil amendments, you fertilize, you grow it very intensely. So you're trying to pull off a crop in maybe like 5 to 7 years. You're growing it so close together. Ginseng is prone to various fungal diseases. So you're probably going to have to use fungicides of some sort. We do now have some organic fungicides that can be pretty helpful unless you get into a really tough season with a lot of disease pressure and the weather conditions to support it. Um, but there are some parts of the country that are doing a lot of this, and we have two very large woods grown or woods cultivated ginseng farms in our region. The roots look more natural than they do coming out of artificial shade, so they will give a higher price. And these are probably not ones that you would grind up or extract and put into an energy drink or something like that. They have a little more value than that. The main interest that we have in our Appalachian region and what my co-author Scott Persons developed with his book American Ginseng Green Gold is considered a classic on this wild simulated production. And it's trying to grow ginseng and these other roots. So this doesn't just apply to ginseng, but that's what he developed it with, to look as close to natural as possible. And so the plants aren't done really intensely. There's much more space around the plants. You want to have a bit of what we call a polyculture. So there's other plants there, so you don't have a monoculture going on. Your yields are going to be lower. It's going to take the plants longer to reach a harvestable stage because they've got more competition from other plants and tree roots and such. But in the case of ginseng, it can come up with a much more valuable root. And we have growers doing wild simulated who you can't, none of us probably in this room could tell the difference from it and a true wild root. Some of our buyers could see little things that would clue them in. But the growers I know doing this kind of wild simulated production don't deal with this in hundreds of pounds at a time. They deal with it in small quantities. So depending on the year, they're getting $500, $800 a pound for these roots. And then the more new category that we're calling managed wild or wild stewarded. And that's for those species that just have an unpredictable market. So a lot of times that you'll find you have a little population of something like this on your property, say it's blue cohosh, and you would just steward that. You take care of it. You might propagate some from it, make sure that those seeds make contact with the soil and they grow. And then that population is there for you to harvest from if you need to. But you're not going into all of the effort of preparing beds, maintaining beds, fertilizing, and such. So today we're going to focus on the woods grown and the wild simulated methods because those are the ones that we're getting the most inquiries about, and it's what most of the forest farming literature and I think a lot of what's going to come through NRCS and such is going to be focused on. Most important is site selection, without a doubt. And the problem that I encounter frequently is people buy a piece of land and they really know nothing about it. They know nothing about the history of it, and they immediately want to start a forest farm. So I really encourage people that if they're new to that land, talk to the neighbors, look at past records, go to the Farm Service Agency, learn whatever you can about that land. Because I don't know how it is here in Missouri. I'm assuming it's the same. Our weather is so unpredictable now, and we can have 3 to 4 year droughts. I bought my farm in a drought. I'm right adjacent to a bog. I didn't know that until the 5th or 6th year when I finally went to sink a post hole and hit water this far down. Never could have tell those first years that we were there. And I'm so glad that we never did any extensive plantings because we would have made some serious mistakes. So learn about it. In many regions, you have extension personnel or state agronomists or herbalists, ethnobotanists that people can pay to come walk that land. And I encourage them to do this several times a season. Do it in the spring. do it in midsummer and do it again in the fall, where you pay them to come see what's going on that land and identify existing populations. And yes, this is putting some money out front, but we've got some folks now that are doing a really great job of this and creating a beautiful package for those people to work with. And now with all of the GIS resources and such, they can put together a really useful document for you moving forward. So just in general, you need a shaded site, maybe about 75% shade, if we say generally, over most of these species. Back in the day, we used to try to come up with ways to measure the light, and we were out there with light bars and all this kind of stuff. And what we've just learned is most people have a pretty natural sense of this. The only folks that I've kind of run into a problem with are my real true farmers who are used to growing production crops, often horticultural, and they're kind of looking for the least work method. And so they'll pick an area that they don't see a lot that they have to clean out. They're like, oh, yeah, this is going to be easy. I don't have to get rid of all this stuff on the forest floor. And, then we have to go. So why isn't there anything on the forest floor? And it's usually because it's too dark. So, just finding that area, we go with mixed hardwood forest. We say some pines are okay, but I'm going to show you some pictures that it's all ginseng under pine. So it happened. Scott Persons, his first planting, he didn't know any better. His first planting of ginseng was under pine. So a lot of it depends on what's happening in the soil. I suspect the one big pine forest that we have where a bunch of ginseng's now planted at one point was a hardwood forest, and it was a pine plantation put in later. Um, you do want good airflow and good water drainage. Most of these plants are not going to tolerate wet feet. Phytophthora getting into ginseng is just a heartbreaking thing to watch. So, understand that. Remember, just think fungal diseases that you want to prevent. Having a good, rich soil high in organic matter, if you can arrange that, is great. In our region, up on our mountains, sometimes there's just a couple of inches of soil on top of the rock. So people will build soil. They'll bring in organic matter and work on that over a couple of years. And in many cases, the soil should stay moist most of the year. So this is what we've learned with some crops. I'll use ramps as an example, is we have found that we can grow ramps in full sun as long as that soil is moist. So it's, just finding what those plants really need. There are a number of different guides out there that talk about indicator plants or companion plants that you want to look for. I suggest you look for other forest medicinals, either the same ones you want to grow. Black cohosh is growing there and looks healthy. It's probably a good place to grow black cohosh. But note what those plants are and what some of there's like ginseng indicator plants and such out there. So you want it where other similar plants are growing and look like they're going to be happy there. And then in time, you're just going to be able to tell from your own experience. Again, using ramps as an example, when we were first starting our research with ramps, I'd harvested ramps in Pennsylvania. I never had in North Carolina, and I hadn't really paid attention. So what I did is I brought in a bunch of the guys from the research station who love to hunt and fish, and they do little ramp festivals every year. And I said, would you walk the research station woods with me and help pick out sites? And they love to do it. And, that got them engaged in the project too. So my ramps have always been well cared for because they helped get that research started. But, taking that experience, they just naturally knew, Jeanine, that would be a great place to grow ramps. So finding people that have that knowledge is really, really great. Very helpful. For some reason, a lot of folks don't think that you have to test the soil. So, all our production crops, everyone knows the first thing you do is take a soil test. Same thing is true with our forest farming. We might not make as many changes, but if we see something is really deficient or there's a problem, this is the time to deal with it. pH, sometimes adjusting that pH just a little bit for ginseng and goldenseal will make a huge difference in how quickly that plant will grow. When we did our first studies looking at soil pH and calcium on goldenseal, we had for 5 years at the lowest pH, which was native soil, it was like pH 4.9 that I took out of our woods. I planted it, it lived, but it didn't grow. It gained no weight over all those years. Bouncing it up just a little bit was what it took for that plant to flourish. And also invest in a nematode test. We have had a number of growers who had what looked to be good ginseng growing, but when we dug those roots, we found root knot nematodes, and it made those roots unmarketable. So here is on that left-hand side is the ginseng being grown under pine in the high country of Western North Carolina. And it's doing really, really well, thank you. So the first thing you need to do is clean and clear the site. Um, it's really hard to draw out your plot plans when you're dealing around trees and such. Maybe easier when they're all in tidy little rows, but that's not the kind of situation that I work in. But just getting things cleaned out enough that you can plant and get some kind of measurements on your beds or your area so you can do yield estimates later on and just be able to keep track of what's happening to your populations. For the woods cultivated botanicals, we will often do raised beds. And not quite sure why, but in about the past 5 years, people have started putting sides on these beds. I'm not sure why they're doing this. They look really sweet. So if you have an agritourism situation, this looks nice, but they're lugging all this lumber into the woods. A lot of it's not pressure treated. You know what? 5 years max, they're going to get out of this. But this is a trend, and I'm seeing it all over the eastern forest. So we do have some in some of our research beds and work that we're doing with some students and stuff like that. But don't really see the need. But if you can build raised beds, you can add your amendments. That's best. With woods cultivated, the use of organic fungicides and herbicides are generally accepted within that method. When you get into the wild simulated setting, you want to do things as natural as possible. And so people usually don't do any kind of fungicide treatments or such in this. They will protect the plants from critters and such, but they usually don't spray. Now, I always have some that are like, if that's what it's going to take to save my crop, that's what I'm going to do. But this is our simple system. You start in the upper left there. We mark out the plot that we're going to do, usually a measured area, because that helps us know how much seed to spread. We rake away the leaf litter. If we need a little gypsum or lime, and there's a little bit of controversy on whether the ginseng really benefits from that calcium or not, but most of us just go ahead and go, all right, this isn't going to hurt. We spread a little calcium. Then we scatter the seed and we weigh out seed, like it's usually like an ounce to 100 square feet, scatter it lightly, and then we just walk on it to push those seeds into the ground, and then we will spread the leaves back over it, maybe rake it in a little. But you want it really spread out. This is a key point to impress upon people. You mentioned this a little bit, the seed and planting stock issue. It is huge. You'll see Strictly Medicinals is on here. This is part of 2 projects that we're on right now to help grow this part of the industry. Getting adequate seed or planting stock to do large-scale commercial production is a real problem right now. And the prices are so high that it's like, how is anyone going to make money if they spent that much in the beginning? I worked real closely with a couple of nurseries and greenhouses a few years ago, and finally one of them got up with me about it, and they said, Jeanine, not only is it hard for us to make money on this, but I know you're growers. And I know that if I sell them flats of goldenseal plants to start their forest farm, they're only going to buy them from me once. because ever after that, they're going to propagate their own. They want things like bedding plants that you buy over and over and over again. So we're learning about that industry. And I have a flyer. We're going to do a listening session because we talked to a bunch of nurseries a few weeks ago, and they suggested this that we hold this listening session so we can talk about what are the limitations. What will it take to make planting stock a viable industry for both ends? So if you want to join, please do so. But you want high quality seed. I don't recommend buying from eBay. Find people that know what it is they're growing. Positive identification is critical. If you're growing herbs for medicine, you've got to know what you have. And take yellow cohosh and black cohosh. Unless you're a botanist, most of us could not tell those two roots apart. So be really careful about making sure you're dealing with someone that deals with these medicinal herbs and has built a reputation there. This can be expensive. This is where you're probably going to put a lot of your money into. We are going to be digging some from the wild. We're going to be digging some from friends' forested property. If you go that route, just be sure you're doing it sustainably and you're not wiping out other native populations. In the wild simulated setting, we sow seed in the fall is best. We do a lot of seeding in the early spring also. We broadcast that seed very lightly. We have these little bags of seed weighed out or number of roots, a weight that we will put in a set area. Also, there's been some folks now that are using these little seeders or that they just come along and poke in their ground. I've also got guys that have just taken a piece of PVC pipe, sharpened an end on it, made it kind of a blade, and they just stick it in the ground and they drop a seed in. That's going to work in some sites, not others. I tried it in one of our sites that there's just too much rock and clay, and it was a very frustrating situation. But if you've got the kind of land that will work in, you can go ahead and do that. And it's interesting to see with personalities who just can't help but put things in tidy rows versus who can scatter. It's kind of fun. Here again is the wild simulated setting, and the gentleman in the foreground there, that is Scott Persons, who came up with this method, just showing how he is raking in, covering things. He does this method where he has a length measured on his rake, okay? And he pulls down a whole line of leaves, let's like a 4-foot bed, sows his seed, then he walks up about above that and then pulls the next 4 feet of leaves down and works that way all the way up the hillside. So Scott was really good at coming up with the most efficient way to do things. Here it is. We are in the woods grown setting where we'll often bring in some kind of mulch to put on top. On the right, you see people using straw. For some reason, that does not work for us in our area. So they can do really well with that in Wisconsin and Illinois. But all of our tests on ginseng, goldenseal, and black cohosh, when we use straw, we have a lot more rot, and the slugs absolutely adore it. So we suggest using either crushed up, ground up, composted leaves, or we have a lot of a mixed hardwood bark sawdust mix that works really well for us. Then you do have to do some maintenance. So this isn't a matter of just planting things out and ignoring it for 7 years. You do have to come back and check on those sites, visit them regularly. Voles have been an increasing problem for people all over the United States. So controlling it's heartbreaking. And we have actually watched a vole. Remember those Bugs Bunny cartoons where the carrot got pulled down into the ground? We've actually seen that with a ginseng plant. And I had the NC State vole specialist there where we watched it because he didn't think that voles ate ginseng until we observed that. He trapped them, he dissected them and yep, belly's full of ginseng. So voles are a problem. People working with various kinds of baits. Some people release a lot of cats. We have concern for wildlife, so we want to be sure that we're not killing off our hawks and owls and everything else. A big problem for us has been fallen trees. So we'll have a tree come down and suddenly we've got this hole in the sky that allows rain to come in and start washing away, especially freshly seeded beds. So you've got to be out there and walking around. Insects and diseases. I urge everyone when they're planting these unusual crops to inform their extension agent or whoever is going to be out there to help them about what they're growing so that you don't suddenly end up with a sick black cohosh plant. You go running into your extension agent and go, "What's wrong with my plant?" And that poor agent goes, "What is that plant?" Let them know. Like, I'm a specialist, so I do a lot of training. I have a bunch of people, a bunch of agents who are now taking the forest farming training who never took it before because they now have people in their county that are doing it. We do have in our book, my good friend, the botanist and plant pathologist, Dr. Joanne McCoy, she put together a section at our end of our book that at that time in 2014 were all the known diseases for all the plants listed in the book. And what we recommend in North Carolina is if your plant gets sick, and it's one of these weird ones, and when you go to send in a sample to the disease clinic, that you photocopy that page. So again, that pathologist running that clinic might not be familiar, but he could or she could go, "That's definitely not Phytophthora, that's definitely not Alternaria," and narrow down the things they need to look at. But it's just your basic organic practices. Don't over fertilize, don't overwater, try to have a diversity of plants, don't have things planted too close together. Just do your best. Slugs are my nemesis. They find me everywhere. I've tried more slug products than you can imagine. The voles, the rice, the mice, the rats, turkeys. These are some of the the pictures on the bottom are from our trail cameras catching it, the deer out there. I am very fortunate on my research station. The deer want the apples. We're a big apple research station. They want the apples a whole lot more than my ginseng. So they don't bother my ginseng too much, but for a lot of people and much of the United States, this kind of browse is devastating to their industry. So do what you have to protect them. When I plant Goldenseal, I buy, and I do seeds, I get screening that comes on a roll. And that's what you see on that bottom slide. I pin it down with landscape pins and hopefully I didn't trap any slugs in there, but it's done pretty well. We do our traps. The upper right is where I'm working with students from Salem College, and to protect their plants so they could finish that project, we built these cages. They've been great for getting plants established, especially ginseng. And they also saved a big bed from when a tree fell down. Crushed the cage, but saved the plants. But this is our biggest problem when it comes to growing ginseng. And this all depends on where you're located and whether harvesting sang is part of what people do. Where I am, this is part of the culture of what people do. You hunt squirrels, you hunt deer, you hunt turkey, you hunt ginseng, you hunt ramps. This is just what you do. And some people do it ethically and they follow the rules and others don't. And when the economy gets bad, a bunch of people hit the woods. And so this was a huge problem for a long time that we weren't able to really deal with. But now with modern technology, with little bitty cameras that nobody can see, and the fact that you can now monitor them and get notified on your phone, and these cameras and the technology is enough that it can tell the difference between a deer and a person, has been fantastic. And we've had some felony convictions in our area because somebody, yep, that has been, I mean, we broadcast that everywhere because it is a felony in North Carolina to steal someone's planted ginseng. So Being able to do this, to be able to spot them and see them, we do have to remind people you can't shoot them, but but you can arrange, most places there's only going to be a few places where those people are probably coming in and out of. You can have law enforcement there, and our law enforcement has become better informed. It used to be you were afraid to tell anyone, but now we're taking much more of a community watch approach. Collecting, saving, and germinating your own seed. Um, these, again, are wild plants that are going to have very different requirements, and you do have to do some homework. Okay, you can go to workshops and learn how to do this. You can read books on it. You've got to learn each one of these is going to have different requirements. Be real careful with the YouTube videos. Some of them are right, and some of them, of course, are really off base. But learn about each one of these plants. Some of them need to take time. Ginseng, for example, when that berry is ripe, the embryo is immature. It has to go through a stratification experience. That embryo has to mature. Inhibitors have to be leached out of the seeds, and it has to go through some warm and cold treatments. So learn each one. And then part of what you do is you play around and figure out how can I do this better? Richo Czech of Strictly Medicinals, he's come up with all these great methods. And Richo and I would talk, and he'd tell me how he would do a little bunch of seeds. And, oh, yeah, I hang those in a little cheesecloth bag. And whenever I'm by the sink, I just rinse them with water and hang it back up. And then I try to take what he's learned and go, all right, how can we do that on a commercial scale? So you can contribute to this literature. And this is where I find that those avid hobbyists are the ones that often figure this out and then share that with us. This is Goldenseal, and you can see the little black seeds inside, and my nemesis, the slugs, open that up so you could see that. Okay. Number of these seeds can never be allowed to dry out. Ginseng and Goldenseal are two of those. So you don't dry them and let them sit around like tomato seeds. You've got to find a way to keep them moist. Real quick, this is just how we handle ginseng and Goldenseal. We harvest the ripe berries. We mash them. You'll notice that this person's wearing gloves because some people react to some of the chemicals within that berry pulp. Then we add water. We let it sit for maybe a day or two and ferment so that you can then rinse away all that pulp and end up with a clean seed. Some people do a 10% bleach rinse to help get rid of any pathogens on the surface. And then we make either screen pouches. Again, we love window screening. We make lots of stuff out of those. Or you can see my research scholar, Margaret, down at the bottom, where those are bigger boxes. Those are plastic, like Rubbermaid type boxes where she's cut out the bottom and put a screen in the bottom. And then they're buried in the same kind of site that we'd grow in. It's covered with leaves. And then you get the temperatures, nature's temperature changes, and rain leaching through. We do that. So fall from this year, we'd harvest these seeds. We'd do this. We'd wait a year. Then we would dig those up and plant those seeds, and they would come up the following spring, hopefully. When we harvest our plants, it is really important, first of all, to practice ahead of time. A whole process of harvesting through post-harvest handling to getting it dried in a bag, you need to practice ahead of time. We've had many people lose their market because they had it growing beautiful in the woods, but they didn't know how to do all that part. And it took too long, or they wrecked it. So you've got to learn how to wash it. You've got to learn how to dry it. You got to learn how to package it. So, and then also maintaining the integrity, doing cleanliness, just thinking of all of those things. If you're farmers with any other crops, your good agricultural practices, understand the good manufacturing practices that your buyer has to abide by so that they can meet those by buying your product. Here are some of the ways that the roots and herbs are washed. We often use a cement mixer with a plastic bin so we can sanitize the inside of that. So we don't use, one of those old metal ones. Buy a new one. They're not expensive. Then we'll put them on screens and finish off using a high pressure washer. The two bottom photos are from the Herb Hub in Virginia as part of the Appalachian Sustainable Development Project with stainless steel sinks. And now that's a root washer used for carrots. I was concerned whether that would still be allowed by FSMA, the Food Safety and Modernization Act, but so far we're okay with that. So just making that a method efficient, or you're spending all this time doing that kind of cleaning. Most of these herbs are purchased dry. Now, ginseng, more and more and more is purchased fresh and wet because the buyer wants to do the drying because people are screwing it up. It's really easy to not dry your ginseng properly, and you end up like getting it too hot, it seals the outside, and the inside never dries right. So more and more of the buyers would rather buy it fresh from you, and they handle the drying because they've got the equipment and the experience to do it. So this is what you'd want to know from your buyer. How do they want this done? Do they need it cut in any way? What do you want this done? But temperature control and air movement are critical. We usually try to keep the temperatures as low as we possibly can and move a lot of air. So, but across the state of North Carolina, it really varies for me. I can have much lower temperatures in the mountains than I can in the Piedmont, where the humidity is so much higher. So this is what you've got to practice with. Then what else does your buyer need? Whoops, come back. What else does your buyer need? Does it need to be garbled? And that's where you are basically rubbing it against a screen and basically breaking up your leaves. That would be for an herb product, not a root. Do they need it cut? How much are you going to cut? This again is where you've got to find out what FSMA says about that root. Like we have learned with some of our roots. Originally, they said you can't cut your roots at all. If you cut your roots, you're no longer a farmer, you're a processor. Okay. We've got great food safety people at NC State. They went and talked to FSMA and we're allowed to make a certain number of cuts in order to be able to dry it safely. Also, if you're selling to another processor, let's pick on Gaia Herbs. If you can have documentation from Gaia that they are the ones that are going to turn it into a product, then you're not a processor and you can do that cutting. So there's these little rules and regulations that you've just got to become familiar with. They're not really hard to cope with, but when you don't know and you messed up, then you've got a problem. So find this stuff out, find out what's going on in your area, attend those workshops. Then how does your buyer want it packaged? That cardboard drum in the center is the typical ginseng drum that is used to export it to Asia. Others use the super sacks shown in white, so those could be all full of roots. The vacuum sealed bags, I know a lot of herbs sold to Gaia Herbs are vacuum sealed in those bags. Other times, just good plastic bags. Do not show up to your buyer with black garbage sacks with your herbs. Remember, this is something I tell people, is this something that you would feed your child or your grandchild? Thanks. Oops, we got a book here. Keep good records all the way through the process. Do lot numbers, dates, package labels. Treat this like you would any other crop. We've mentioned this already. Focus on that quality, good agricultural practices, and whether your products will help your buyer meet their good manufacturing practices. So sometimes there's heavy metal tests, pesticide tests, bioactive analysis. Who's going to pay for that? There's a lot that goes into producing these botanicals. How are you going to make money with this? So keep these records, do those enterprise budgets, do all your normal things that, your business plans when you draw this up. Assumptions often are people can find wild harvested price lists. Those are readily available. Prices for cultivated herbs are not shared the same way. Well, if you can make money off these wild harvested lists, go for it. But I don't think you can. So again, meeting buyers, going to the big trade shows, attending buyer grower events so that you can talk one-on-one with them so you can find out what their prices are. What are your long-term plans? Understand that for most people, forest farming is a supplemental income, and this is true across North America. It is not usually the prime part of your income. It's a way to generate some more money off your land, help you pay the taxes, bring in a little extra cash. That's not saying you can't make it all of your business. This is a great example. Ed and Carol Daniels of Shady Grove Botanicals in West Virginia, a good example of a super diversified business. They do a bit of everything, but they're so smart and they're so organized and they must work 24/7. Not all of us could do this. This takes very special people to make this happen. And a lot of us would just go, oh my God, that's exhausting just to think about. So what part do you want to do? But no, maybe you could supply them. Maybe they don't have enough black cohosh and you could be supplying that for them. Wholesale, a lot of people think of buying wholesale or selling wholesale to these big buyers or consolidators. Build a good relationship with them. This is where you move big volumes at the lower price, but it can be your most consistent market. Most manufacturers don't buy direct from growers. Very few of them. They go for those consolidators, but we do have some. Herb Farm, Red Moon Herbs in our area, Gaia Herbs, they will. But build those relationships and realize that it's going to take probably about 3 years before you both get in a good place with it. Or you could sell directly to retailers. We've got a number of folks around us that fill the jars at their local health food store or their co-op. You know, there'll be a row of Frontier herbs and then there's a row of theirs. Can you make that? Can you make money doing that? How much time are you spending running around to these stores filling jars? You can make your own value-added products. And I see this happening more and more, that people are doing that seed to shelf kind of production. But again, this takes a special kind of person to make this happen. A lot of rules and regs when you start doing products. Used to be you could do soaps, lotions, and salves without any problem, but now we've got FDA regs on that too. You got to have an online presence. And when you go to do this, spend that money to have a professional build that site that you can then keep updated. Okay. Makes a big difference. And people, if they trust you or not, of whether you've got a site that looks like it was built 20 years ago or not. Doing that diversity in our area, agritourism is a great fit. And people love to walk the woods. They like to have an herbalist there. You do an herbal luncheon. You teach them how to make a salve. You know, it can be a whole day event that you charge them $150 a piece for. The bottom line is you need to know how much you're spending to do this. Keep the records, every little bit. Even though it's probably your time and your family, record those hours. So then when you really get moving along, you have an idea of how many hours it took to plant. Understand taxes, advertising, web hosting. I didn't know what personal property business tax was until I got asked about it. I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be paying that? Um, nobody told me. You know, that wasn't a good enough excuse. Um, then, you know, just do those enterprise budgets. And we got lots of people that will help. There are small business centers all over the nation that will help you with this. Great books on the topic. The Forest Farmer's Handbook has just been updated. Richo has just redone the Growing at Risk Medicinal Herbs. I think it's a 2-volume set now, maybe. Our book, the publisher just asked me if we wanted to revise it again. I haven't had the guts to ask Scott yet because I think he's going to say no. I love the Organic Medicinal Herb Farmer, and they have just revised that. It's not focused on forest farming, but it's everything you need to know about growing and harvesting and selling and drying and all that. My website is full of information, and the shortened URL is just ncherb.org. Our Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmer Coalition is now the Appalachian Forest Farmer Coalition. We're going on to the next stage with this project. So much information, so many incredible videos. This is one of those where you're going to spend days looking at the resources on this. So AppalachianForestFarmers.org. And then I added this about the listening session that we're going to do on the 29th. The easiest way to find that is go to Facebook and look up the NC Alternative Crops and Organics program page. And there we go. I stay on time, Raylan? You didn't even have to pull up that last one. We have any questions?
So I'm not super familiar with all of the ecological benefits of these practices, but are there any like pollination, like native pollinator support related practices with this? And then if there are, if producers introduce like honeybees and stuff to those systems, does that introduce any competition with native pollinators?
Great question. You want to be a graduate student on that? That is, so we've got botanists working in the forest that have looked at some of those. But to the best of my knowledge, people are doing some of it, especially our permaculturists. And so in our region, we've got a lot of permaculture people working in this area, and they're introducing that. But whether it actually makes a difference or not, I have not seen that work. So what is very exciting to me right now is there was such a small group of us doing this work for so many years that now that the funding is available and the interest is high, I think our knowledge is just going to explode. But that's one great question. It's one that my Margaret Bloomquist is very, very concerned about. So she's always taking pictures and showing us pollinators out there. So right now we go a lot with trying to keep a polyculture out within the woods, but I don't have that data. Good question. Yes.
Is it okay if I ask about the reindeer bloodroot farm? I'd love to, next time I'm in Maryland, I'd love to meet them.
I'll have to go find his name again. I haven't talked to him for a few years. So, but yeah, it was fascinating when he called me up, and he's kind of like in a pretty urban setting. So yeah, it was just fascinating.
I'm interested to know more about the buyers and the system in place and how you might, create it if you could restructure it, and if they're commission based, most of them, and what sort of connections they have or should have to the actual suppliers.
So you know how the whole old wild harvest industry worked. We had these buyers, they're scattered all over. There were a couple big ones, so people be all over the mountains, and you would harvest your roots and you'd take to somebody that was there at the general store or later at the local gas station. Like all around us was We Buy Ginseng would be out along the roads, and then they would buy and then they would sell to the bigger consolidator within that region. And like North Carolina, Wilcox Natural Products was our big one. They're gone now. There's a number of them in Kentucky. We still have quite a few. Ridge Runner Trading is one of our bigger ones. And you'd sell to them and then they sell to the companies. But now we've got more of our manufacturers wanting a better quality raw material. And so we're trying to navigate that very carefully. We've been fortunate that they have been willing to attend. We hold 2 grower buyer events just through our program. I'd like to see some bigger regional ones that maybe we work with Virginia Tech and Appalachian Sustainable Development and such, and do some bigger ones. The American Herbal Products Association, which is the industry group, some of my colleagues are on that board, so working with them and just getting them to fully understand the situation and how we're going to move this forward so it works for everyone. Nobody can get cheated, but we're still working on it. Right now, I think people can move whatever they produce.
And
yeah.
The lobby you mentioned, the American Herbalists, is so far that's a good thing for the suppliers as well.
Yes, definitely. They're the ones that really are part of it.
Have you ever heard what they end up doing with the Aristolochia serpentaria once they buy it? Because I know in the past American Botanicals bought it for a high price per pound, but it's not allowed to be used in for something that humans eat. So I don't know. I'm still puzzled over that.
No, that's one where I'd have to ask around a little bit. What I was surprised to find out, I have a brother-in-law that works for a big pet food company. And how much of these herbs go into pet food? Goldenseal for race horses. I had a period of time, I board donkeys and sometimes horses, and one that would get this moody mare all herbal formula all the time. So there's these other markets that we aren't even thinking about. You know, most of us think of the traditional, you know, tinctures and capsules and stuff that humans take, but there's lots of other purposes. And sometimes they just won't tell you.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's secret. It's still a really interesting, it's opened up a whole lot more, but it's still a very tight little industry, and getting yourself in there where you learn this stuff, it can be difficult, but fun.
I'll get, oh, go ahead.
I have a question, kind of going back to the beginning of the talk, but talking about how you mentioned that ginseng is protected from CITES and has all this regulation from the U.S. for Fish and Wildlife and numerous different, you know, protections there. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that model being applied to other species, if that is a positive thing, if it has negative implications for growers. And you know, what do you think in terms
Oh,
of
yeah. And
translating
some of
that?
our other plants are also on CITES as Appendix 2 or Appendix 1 plants. And yes, there is, I don't want to give too much information since this goes out everywhere, but we've got someone trying to take one of our plants and take it to the next highest level and basically make export totally illegal from North America, from the United States. And I think that's an awful idea, because once you ban something, what happens? It's all going to go on the black market. And so we're going to hurt a lot of people. And especially when it's anything wild harvested, I'm fiercely protective of the wild harvest industry because it is something so many people still depend on. I'm encouraged that there's more understanding of conservation and stewardship than there were 30, 40 years ago, but that would kill that industry. And, you know, it would hurt a lot of people. So there are pros and cons. And I think like with ginseng, maybe it's not a perfect system, but the way right now there's monitoring going on. There are people out there. Maybe we need to make people have a permit to wild harvest. Don't know all the answers. We need to have some really honest discussions with representatives from across the industry and the botanists and everybody about it. But that's a good question. And I think sometimes we think we're doing good and we're not really helping things. Yep. All right, well, I'll be around. Oh, you got another question?
Actually, that was kind of my question a little bit indirectly, was just like, what is the future of Goldenseal specifically? Will it be relisted, and how do you foresee that?
And that just got relisted in North Carolina.
Right.
So all it does is make it more difficult for us. So now it's like, you've got to get the permit, and it's through our plant industry division of the Department of Agriculture, and they haven't been able to keep someone in that position. So, you know, it's just like, it just makes it a little harder, you know, and I'm not sure what good is coming from it. We have so little Goldenseal in the wild. I don't know people that wild harvest it. So we're just not the place we're going. Now cross over in Tennessee, get on those more alkaline soils and it grows much better. It does not like our really acidic soils in North Carolina. So, but I'll be around and be happy to answer more questions. Thanks.